Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. I guess I want to start out by asking how many of you are interested in getting into film or television or documentary production, anything like that? So a lot of you. That's great. So you don't want to be rich or successful, I guess. So, all right. So I want doing now, I cannot possibly teach you documentary production in 20 minutes. But what I can do is tell you how I got into it, a little bit about my own principles of documentary production, and then I'd like to leave a little time for you guys to ask questions because I don't want to assume that I'm talking about what you want to learn about. So first of all, my last job as a full-time documentary producer was at Capitol Broadcasting Company in Raleigh. I produced probably 75 or 80 documentaries for them over 17 years. Mostly half-hour documentaries, issue-oriented, topical documentaries that were broadcast on their television stations. They had 3 television stations, their streaming platforms, and also broadcast on the statewide PBS network, PBS-NC. One of the last projects I did there, I left 2 years ago to go back to being an independent producer because we wanted to move to Tryon. One of the last projects I did there was for an external distribution. I did a 6-part series on the murder of Michael Jordan's father and the trial that followed. And it was a very controversial case. There were 2 suspects that were arrested, and there were questions about the police investigation and the trial. So we did a 6-part documentary series about that was distributed first to Amazon and its IMDb channel, and I think now it's on Freevee, and you can also find it on Amazon still, and I think IMDb. But it was a fascinating project to work on, and since it was my most recent documentary project, I'm working on another little indie doc right now. I just wanted to show you the trailer for it. So this will kind of give you it was like 6 40-minute episodes. But this is like a 2-minute synopsis of the whole series, just to kind of give you an idea of the feel of it and the content of it. So Cruz, if you would play that for me, please. Thanks. Thank you. It was a fascinating project to work on, and just to talk a little bit about the role of a documentary producer in something like that. First of all, most of the documentaries I did prior to that were issue-oriented documentaries, which are actually kind of a little more complicated than something like this. Because you have to take a complex issue and find a way to tell it in a way that engages the audience and the audience can understand it. And the best way to do that is to take the small story to illustrate the broader issue. So whether the issue is poverty, the environment, criminal justice, whatever it might be, you want to find the person or people who are most affected by that issue and tell the story through their eyes and their voice. And that helps you, an audience can relate to that and can understand it better than just a PowerPoint. Here we're going to give you all the information about poverty, or we're going to give you all the information about this issue or that issue. You really need to tell stories and tell it through the eyes of those affected the most. In this case, it's a little different because it's not an issue story. It's a story about something that happened and a controversy in the criminal justice system. And so it was a different approach. But what a producer does is, all right, I've been assigned this topic. How am I going to tell this story? What are the visuals going to be? Who are the main characters going to be? My choice in this was to kind of limit the main characters, to have the protagonist, antagonist, which was the prosecutor that originally tried the case, and someone with the North Carolina Center for Actual Innocence who believes that they got the wrong guy for pulling the trigger. And they were kind of back and forth through the whole documentary, and then there were supporting characters like other people who were involved in the case or had opinions about the case, and I would weave them in. And one of the things I did, I know it kind of sounds like a romantic kind of cool job, but try reading an 8,500-page trial transcript. That about killed me. I thought I was reading Ayn Rand, but it was fascinating, though. I've covered a lot of trials as a reporter, so I knew some of the language in the transcript. I knew some of the terminology, and so it was easier for me than a layman just to kind of go through it and pick out what's important. But that was an important guide as to how to tell this story. And in different documentation, coming from the Innocence Center, and you know, just coming from all directions, and then doing interviews. So, but you do the research, you figure out who you need to interview to tell the story, you go do the interviews with them, you write the script. In this case, there's no narration, so writing a script means choosing the sound in the order that you want it to be presented from the interviews that you shot in a way that's cohesive and helps tell the story. It can be really tricky to tell a documentary without narration. Most of the documentaries I've produced had a narrator, and what that allows you to do is take a complicated issue and condense it down into a short amount of time. When you don't have a narrator, and you can also, you know, you can fill in pieces of information that you maybe don't have sound for. So narration makes it a little easier, actually. So when you don't have narration and all you have is this sound, you got to figure out how to, you know, we did hours and hours of interviews, like for instance, the interview with the prosecutor and the interview with the Innocence Commission person, each were 3 to 4 hours long. And then shorter interviews, but you have to figure out, all right, what am I going to take out of all that sound and all that media? What order am I going to put it in? And I script that out, and then I hand it to an editor. And then I work with the editor on filling in the missing visual pieces that, you know, okay, you know, we need more footage of the courthouse, or we need more footage from the evidence room, or we forgot to shoot the gun, you know, that kind of thing. We got to go back and shoot that. So that's what a producer does. A producer is essentially in charge of the production. And in my case, versus an executive producer, is very involved, you know, out there directing, doing the interviews, you know, pretty much doing everything but actually shooting it myself. And I did shoot a few things myself, because, you know, I do know how to shoot, but that's essentially what a producer does. I'm also a writer, so I write the scripts, and then I oversee post-production. How I got into this is what I was told to speak about to some degree. You know, everybody gets into it a little differently. There's a lot of different ways to get into documentary production, and there's a lot of different kinds of documentaries. I took mine from a more journalistic approach versus a feature film type background. You know, my background as a journalist, that's kind of how I approach my documentaries. I want to be accurate, I want to be fair, and I want to make sure the audience walks away understanding what I was trying to tell them and understanding the story that I was trying to tell. But I got into it with an interest in filmmaking when I was a kid. I bought a little camera and I started shooting my own movies and making films because I was just fascinated by that. And when I got into college, I started taking media arts courses. So I took film and cinematography and things like that, which were all in writing, a lot of writing. That was very, very helpful to me. I thought I was going to be a filmmaker. That's what I wanted to do. But then I was kind of a news junkie, and I got really interested in journalism and the altruism behind journalism. You know, that it's so important to keep our society informed in a democratic country, and hold public officials accountable, and you know, all that just really appealed to me. And I thought, well, how can I combine those two things? So went into broadcast journalism and television, because all the filmmaking and photography and stuff that I took in media arts could be applied in television reporting. So I became a television news reporter. I was that for 9 years, did a little radio news before that, right out of college. And kind of got a little burned out on it and was offered a job to come work in politics. I worked for a governor, and it was like a deputy press secretary, and I wrote speeches and did things like that. The speech writing really helped me. It helped my writing, because you write for the ear, and in broadcast, you write for the ear, broadcast or streaming. So that really helped me kind of hone my writing, and then I went out as an independent because I got sick of working in politics. It was just crazy. I was interested in politics. I was always the political reporter wherever I worked, but once you get inside and kind of get involved in how it works, it's not so great. It's a lot of work, and I was just being worked to death. And after about 2 years, I decided, I want to go back into TV. I love TV. I love visual storytelling. I did a lot of video production right out of leaving that job. Started my own company, and that video production kind of led to documentary production work, where I was lucky enough to have some nonprofit organizations who were kind of advocacy organizations come to me and say, hey, would you produce a documentary about our education cause? Would you produce a documentary about our criminal justice cause? And so I was able to produce several short documentaries. They were broadcast on PBS North Carolina, which my clients really liked, of course. And that kind of led to doing some bigger things. PBS NC commissioned me to produce a documentary about teaching that was distributed all over the country. And then that Capital Broadcasting kind of got interested in me and asked me if they were going to start a new documentary unit, and so asked me if I would come run the documentary unit. And that's what I did, because I'm terrible at raising money and smoozing and pitching, and if you're an independent documentary producer, you got to go out and raise the money for your production unless you already have the money. So that was always difficult for me. So to have somebody hire me to produce documentaries, and that's all I was going to be doing, was just a dream come true, and I really, really loved it. So I worked there for 17 years doing that, and I think the culmination of my career there was Moment of Truth, which kind of was a great way to wrap things up for me in that particular job. And now that I'm living out here in Western North Carolina, I'm just kind of back to being an independent documentary producer, but still producing segments for PBS North Carolina. So I can't teach you how to produce a documentary in the time I have, but I would like to get your questions for the time we have left, if you have any, about documentary production or journalism or anything that I've been talking about. Anybody? Yes?
When you're doing crime documentaries, how do you get people to do the interviews?
That is a really good question. There's a real art to getting people to do difficult interviews, and I think the most important thing is to be kind and empathetic to whatever their situation is, number one. And number two, explain to them how doing the interview can help them. It gives them a voice. You can express your own opinion if you do an interview, rather than someone else interpreting what you might be thinking or what your opinion is. So that's a good way to encourage people to sit down and do it. There's a lot of people in the criminal justice cases, that feel like their story hasn't been told, and they want to be out there. They want to do an interview. They want their story to be out for everybody to see, which would be the case with Daniel Green, one of the defendants. I mean, he claims that he didn't pull the trigger, so he wants to tell his story. So he's done interview after interview, with lots of different media outlets. Yes?
How are you able to reach out and get the contact information you need for all these people?
There's lots of ways to do that. I remember, before Google, how hard research was. And now you can just Google it, you can find it. And I've also used social media when I can't readily find somebody that, if it's an academic expert or somebody that's kind of known in their field that you want to do an interview with, they're easy to find. I mean, just Google, click, there they are. And that's part of the research process, reading articles about your issue, reading things that have been written about, so you can identify, oh, I need to interview that guy. I need to interview her. I need to interview this expert. But finding the real people that are affected by the issue is the hardest part. And the way I would find those is usually work with advocacy agencies. Like I remember I was doing a documentary on child hunger, and I was like, I really need a family that has children and they're having trouble feeding their children. So I reached out to several nonprofit organizations in the community that do that work, and they kind of acted as an intermediary for me to reach those people and then get them to sit down and do an interview with us. That's a really good way to do it, to find those real people interviews. And sometimes, it's just kind of going out on the street, depending on what the topic is, So poverty, homelessness, sometimes we just go out and find homeless people. But it's always a little better to work through an advocacy organization, so you kind of know what you're getting into, and they've already been working with these folks, so they already have a relationship, and you're just a stranger. So that really helps to do that. Yeah.
Did you meet Michael Jordan?
No. Yes, I did, and I beat him on one-on-one basketball. No. No, of course, I had to reach out to him, through his people. He has never talked publicly about this case. Briefly on Oprah, not long after it happened, and has never talked publicly about it. But he is very litigious, means he likes to sue people who, if he thinks that they haven't portrayed him correctly. So we had lawyers go through every single frame of video to make sure we had the rights to use it. And that was a real painstaking process. We helped in that process because we had to tell them where we got each piece of video that we didn't create ourselves. So if you're doing a documentary that's kind of historical like this, something that's happened in the past, you know, you've got to find the footage and the photos and the things that will help tell that story that you don't create, but you have to get the rights to. And because of who he is, we had to be very careful about what the source was and whether we could use it or not. Yeah.
Not just with footage, but also with what is kind of your process for getting rights?
I'm sorry, can you speak up just a little?
What is your process for getting rights to a story, not just with footage, but to the whole story as a whole? Is there any sort of...
Well, you don't really have to get rights to the story. I mean, because this is nonfiction. Now, if I'm doing a fictional feature film based on a story, yeah, I got to get the rights to the story. In journalism, you don't need anybody's. You can tell any story you want. It's the First Amendment, right? So, but you have to be, you know, factual, or you face the risk of, you know, being sued for, you know, libel, slander, defamation. So, you know, you have to be really careful that what you're reporting, the story you're telling, is accurate. But, you know, you don't need anybody's permission to tell the story. If you're going to tell somebody else's story, you know, you want their permission, you want them to participate. You know, and I've had people say, you know, well, you know, who are part of a documentary project, well, you know, I'm not going to be in it and I don't want you to tell this story. And I'm like, well, you know, we gave you the invitation to be in it, but we're still going to tell the story, and we gave, you know, we're giving you the opportunity to have your own voice in the story. But if they say no, it doesn't mean we don't do the story. It just because stories are important, you know, and you can't just let, you know, one person who doesn't like it being done kill the whole thing, you know. So that's what journalism is, you know. You have to tell important stories. So yes. Oh gosh, there's so many. Well, that's pretty notable. But there was, I'm trying to think. There was a couple I did that together were part of a series. One was called Standards of Living, and it was about poor conditions for migrant farm labor, their poor housing conditions, and won a DuPont for that one. So that's like the biggest award you can win in my field, which was very cool. And along with another one that we did on domestic abuse. But if you go Google WRAL documentary and just put in, scroll down the list. I haven't been producing for the last 2 years, but for them. But there's lots there. But I would say Standards of Living, Paper Thin Promise, which is about domestic violence, and 6,179 Days, which is an innocence case. That was, I think, 8 or 10 years ago. If you just do 6,149 days, it'll come up. That was one of my favorites, for sure. So I think my time is up.
Time is up. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, everybody.